And welcome to I Am the Tigers for this special episode where I'm joined by Connor. Connor, would you care to introduce yourself to everybody, please?
Yes, I'm Connor Lynn, from the Hull Seahawks. I'm the match night commentator. Also host the Hull Seahawks Behind the Curtain podcast as well.
Lovely. Well, thanks very much for coming along and joining I Am the Tigers tonight. So, Hull Seahawks, going into the season, what were the expectations?
Certainly they were going to be better than the year before. I think it was a 22-23, of course, wasn't the year that people in Hull would have wanted, We think about the previous iteration of Hull hockey, particularly with the Pirates only a few years before, had been very, very successful at this level. Um, there's a few issues with, the Seahawks in 22-23. You think of there's a bit of an injury crisis. There was the import issues with visas. He didn't really get Emil Svek until early November. He was
Mm.
then suspended for 10 games. I think it was I mean, it was in a game against Telford, wasn't it? So,
Yeah,
um,
I was there at that game. And yeah, it was. I mean, it was a big hit.
he's a big guy.
Yeah. Um,
I say that, and then Andre Tamar came in. Just a little bit later. It took till Boxing Day. The Boxing Day sort of series of games for Hull to get both imports on the ice together. And when you're facing those troubles, it's always going to be a difficult year. They gave it their all, they really did. But we had a lot of good chats to Matty Davis last year, sort of in the off season. It was all about finally getting that team that he would have wanted together in Hull. He was able to bring a few core players back in as well from a group of players that he knows so well on and off the ice. Um, getting I would say successful team, because that's what Matty Davis wants. He's a very confident person. He knows what he wants. He wants to win. He's a a natural winner, and anything other than winning upsets him. In the kindest way. I know Matty very well. He doesn't settle for second place,
that's
which
what
I
you
think
want in
it's a
a coach,
good
though.
thing.
Yeah, that's what you want in a coach.
And I say, and that's what last season was about. It was about proving that we can be competitive, and I think they did that on all fronts. They didn't come away with any silverware, yes, and it might be the butt of a few jokes. That's what this league is. Everyone likes to have a little bit of a dig where they can. But Hull have gone from the wooden spoon to a National Cup final to a playoff run and fourth in the league. So they've shown they can do it. It's about consistency. I think that was the thing that they just need to sort of look for, and this year, a few changes might help them do that.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I'm sure we'll get onto that in just a bit, sort of in terms of signings and the like. So expectations at the start of the season were very much an improvement on last season. So I'm guessing playoffs were seen as like an absolute minimum then.
Yeah, absolute minimum. I think Matty wouldn't have he'd been, beside himself. I think if that hadn't happened, I think he knew he'd put together a team that I think would certainly do that. For Matty, even I think in his own head, maybe playoffs weren't even enough. It was to be competitive at that top end of the playoff hunt. Um, I say he wanted silverware, but at a bare minimum, he just needed to prove that we can hang with these bigger teams. These teams that did it the year before and the year before that, and some of these teams that have done it for a decade. And coming in as a new franchise, 12 months in, people don't. So a lot of people don't know that the whole Seahawks didn't want to actually enter the league last year. They wanted to defer to this year, and they were essentially asked to step up a year early. It's why they hadn't signed a player come May in the run
Mhm.
into their first season. They were left to sort of you know see who was available, and that's sort of where it came from. It was a case of last season, the one that's just finished now, was really what Matty had in his mind as these are the Hull Seahawks that he wants to coach, that the whole fans deserve, because Matty being a local guy, he's so passionate about the whole area. He wants Hull guys in Hull winning for Hull, and that's the drive, and that's what he just set out his stall to do last year.
Well, I mean, if you take sort of the season that's just gone, a sort of the first full season, I guess, if you like, of Hull Seahawks, it was definitely a pretty successful one. So talk us through just a little bit more about the season. Do you think there were any kind of key games or key periods of time over the season?
Yeah, I'd say yes. There's been a couple of times where, I'll be honest, Hull are a streaky side. They can go on some great starts. I think last year they won 6 from 7 to open up the season, and they went on a 10-game winning run, sort of January through pretty much all of February. And then they can also go on. I'm thinking there was a period sort of just before Christmas all the way through to early January where it was 4 or 5 losses in a row, and things. At that time it's really difficult to see, where's the next win going to come from to lift the guys because, you know, I say it is that sort of team. We Hull need to find that little bit of consistency. Key games. So I think there's a 2-game series against Leeds before Christmas. I think it might have even been sort of a couple of weeks before, where I think it summed up all. They went to the Castle. It was the first competitive game against Leeds that season, and they turned them over. Absolutely brilliant performance. Finley Ulrich was outstanding. Jordan McLaughlin in the net was brilliant. Um, the very next night, the Hull Ice Arena, Leeds come back with a vengeance. I think it was 5-0. And it's those sort of games where I think it sort of shocked a couple of people. It was a case of we know we can do it on a night basis. It's can we then do it, back to back, and finding the way to sort of, with Leeds, with Milton Keynes, these sides, to do it night in, night out, because we know they can. And that's the reason why I think up to about early January, it was still relatively tight, and then it just slowly spread out, I think, this league, and you sort of got pockets of teams.
Yes.
I say, and then if we're on about key games, Leeds names pops up again, the semi-finals. It's 2 games that lived very long in my memory. I had the pleasure of calling the home game, and then the away game. I was very lucky to be stood pretty much on the whole bench. It's got to see it down there at the ice level. It was absolutely fantastic. Great memories from those nights, and they were the nights where Hull, I think, backs against the wall, showed what Matty wanted. That yes, we can do it. Against this Leeds side, who are, we know how good they are. They're absolutely brilliant, and Matty's got a very good relationship with Ryan Aldridge, from his time in Leeds as well. They know each other very, very well. It's a very friendly rivalry, but Matty knows that those games were key in the season. It's getting to that cup final because although didn't get the hands on the silverware, it was, at least that's a tick in a box of being there. We know we can do it. I say next, there's one more step now. But I say they were absolutely brilliant games to watch, and I think it did put a couple of other teams on notice that maybe this whole side, Matty's doing it, because we had all the the jokes, the heavy metal hockey and all this sort of stuff that Matty had joked about before the year, but the whole style was working against particularly the good, the top sides that they were finding it difficult to hang with Hull, on these, particularly I think it Leeds ice. It's a strange thing with those sides this year that I think each side's home ice suits the other side. It's a very strange one. But yeah, those games were brilliant in terms of the whole side. You got to mention key games. You got to mention the cup final.
Yeah.
I don't know if you managed to catch that on the home game. Hull were so good in that first leg, and they were up 4-3 mid third, I think it was, and then I think it's 12 seconds of madness. Give a bad penalty away, concede on the power play, then concede straight off the face off, and it's just it's like a dagger through the heart. All that hard work can be undone so quickly. And actually, you always knew it was going to be tough going down to MK, don't you? Chasing a result.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, that sort of 12 seconds of madness. I mean, that's really what, Milton Keynes Leeds, they can do that to pretty much anybody. So there's always that danger there. Yeah, perhaps not too surprised there in terms of perhaps sort of some of the key games and key moments there, encompassing the sort of the cup, the semi-final, and then the final against Milton Keynes. Obviously, the final is played towards the end of the season.
Yeah.
Do you think that had any impact on sort of the final few league games and playoff games?
Say it was a difficult one because Hull's March. I say they had very much, I went into one eye on the cup. That was their focus through March to get people ready and rested. Lee Bonner had just come back from suspension after I think he got 8 games in the second leg of the semi. Bobby Chamberlain was really struggling with his shoulder. I think I had a chat with Matty a few weeks ago on our Hull Seahawks podcast that Matty said Bobby was banned from shooting for a few weeks. He was playing, but he was banned from shooting by Matty. He was just playing through injuries that Matty, as Matty said, 99% of players in this league would not play through.
Mm.
But you're not going to stop Bobby playing in the cup final. So you just needed to see him out there that little bit. I say he was resting every other night. Hull were on the ice. But yeah, it's a difficult one because with MK as well, you saw how it's affected maybe both sides running into April. I also had a sort of a thing raised with these the other day, but with both obviously Swindon played MK, Hull played Leeds. Those top two seeds in each group playing each other on the first weekend of the playoffs. I know it just comes down to rink availability, but one of those sides, well, one in each group. MK lost both games, Hull lost both games, and neither can chase it back. So
Mhm.
there's all those things to think about. But yeah, MK and Hull, you can really tell. I think everything was going into those games, and I say Matty did find it so difficult to get the players rested. I think the week before the first leg, MK rested maybe 6 players.
Mhm.
Obviously, they've got such great depth down there in Milton Keynes. Got a fifth line, haven't they?
Brilliant.
Unfortunately, we don't have that luxury. We're only able to rest sort of one player each night to try and do anything. But Hull were in the lucky position where fourth was pretty much wrapped up.
Yeah.
Peterborough and Telford were just that little bit too far away. Swindon were just that had that gap on us, so they had at least the liberty to just go out there and play for the cup in March. Um, could it be a bit sooner? I seem to remember the year before. I think it was maybe a couple of weeks earlier. I don't think it was too much earlier, but I think it was a couple of weeks earlier last year. I say pushing it right to the penultimate week of the regular season is maybe a bit late. I think, to be honest, the semi-finals didn't really start till February this year, did they? Which I think
Mhm.
is pushing right, really. You had all of January to maybe get the semis out the way. If
Yeah.
you can get those done in, much earlier in January, you can final in February, then have a much more consistent run into April. But teams aren't going to want to use it as an excuse also as well.
No, no, absolutely not. And yeah, I mean, it was kind of, I think it's tough as it got in terms of the cup with Leeds in the semi-final and then MK in the final. I mean, to have 4 games against, to be fair, the two best teams in the league, that's going to be a big test for any team. Just want to go back just a little bit. So you mentioned about sort of how Hull had been streaking. There was that great run of form, sort of January, February time, and that very much sort of coincided with the signing of Owen Sobchak as well. What kind
Yeah,
of an impact did he have on the team?
he's absolutely unreal. It was a quick turnaround, of course. Bobby Young departed and Owen announced on the same day. Owen wasn't actually able to play his first weekend in Hull. Just it was an administrative problem that I think people from the IHA were. I think it was maybe at the Junior Olympics or something. I think there was nobody there to register Owen Sobchak for his first weekend, so he had to actually miss that. But yeah, they got him in. It was a game against Sheffield. I think it was a Saturday Sunday game. A couple of games against the Steel Dogs, and oh my, he's involved in all 4 goals. I think on his debut. And then the next night, I think he was 16 points from his first 5 for the Seahawks, and he made an instant impact. He was absolutely unreal. He's so deceptive. Um, you know, Teams don't really know what he's going to do. That little bit of a wild card. Only really he knows what he's going to do, I think. And maybe, Bobby and Emil as well, because he seemed to really get some chemistry with those two. Teams don't want to commit to Sobchak because he's just going to, make you look silly. That's the thing. He seems to have so much time on the puck. He skates so well. Even netminders, you can just see them. He's giving them the eyes, which way he's going to go, and then just does something completely different. Yeah, he's unreal. I think the mid-season pickup of the year. I don't think many people in this league would sort of disagree with that. He's been absolutely fantastic. Um, Statistically, I think he's the top point scorer in the league in terms of points per game. I think
Hmm.
he even outdoes Kieran Brown on that one.
Okay.
He's been so good. You could see within about a month or so, Matty was, re-signed him, get him in 2 more years. He's absolutely, made such an impact in Hull. It's why they've re-signed him. He's committed to the team. I got the pleasure of speaking to him pretty soon after he'd signed, and the reason he chose Hull was he said he's come to the late years in his career. He wants to be with a side who he sees as one being a fun side to play at, great fans, but most importantly, potentially have the chance to win trophies, and that's why he settled. It's great to see.
Yeah, and if he keeps on putting up points like that, then I mean, there's absolutely no reason, if he does that over the course of the whole season, Hull have got to be up there challenging. Is as a sort of a bare minimum. I think a lot of people would say, and yeah, I mean, again, speaking from experience, the previous season with Tigers having signed Rory Herman halfway through the season and sort of the impact he made, just know what kind of a lift, a boost it can give to a team to just bring in somebody who just ends up dominating games. So yeah, sounds
That's
so absolute key signing, and I'm sure with those kind of points, the fans are absolutely loving him.
no, they instantly grew to absolutely love him. I say Bobby Young, I won't ever speak, badly of Bobby Young. He's an absolutely lovely guy. He really, say he was putting so much in, to it, everything he did on the ice, desperately working hard to make sure it, trying to make it work. But Matty had to, make the decision, for an import, point production just simply wasn't there. I think he finished on 30 points in 27 games, if I remember correctly, which for an import centre just doesn't cut it, I think, in the national division. He's a great two-way player, just great face-off winner, so much, great work, on the forecheck, the back check, just able to read the game so well, but just couldn't make it work offensively.
Yeah, and I think as well where with the National League having that three imports or sorry three non-British trained player
Yeah.
limit, you really do need those players to be putting up some big numbers. It's great, if they're bringing stuff like the forecheck, the back check, everything you just mentioned there, but ultimately it's always going to come down to numbers because they're going to be expected to produce. I think quite simply.
Oh yeah, 100%. And a few eyebrows were raised, I think, but Matty made a call, made the switch, and yeah, been proven right on that one, certainly.
Cool. So, at the cup final, as you said, fourth had been secured. So going into the playoffs, what were the expectations then going into the playoffs?
I think Hull were expected to be in Coventry, if I'm being completely. It's not expected. You never sort of take anything for granted. Maybe you've misworded that, but they believed they'd make it to Coventry, in terms of, what they knew they had in the tank, the performances they could put on the ice. And yeah, it stung, it really did sting. I think that it was gut wrenching the way that it ended, against Peterborough on the Saturday night with the Luke Ferrara overtime winner. Because Hull looked really good offensive in that game, but there's probably three turnovers that cost goals. And it's just a case of, if you cut those out, you take it to Sunday and you've still got the chance of Coventry with a game to go. And if it's to end the way it did was, it was heartbreaking. But so it was a tough start. In terms of what Leeds were able to do on that first weekend, they rose their game to another level. Like it was some seriously good hockey that we saw from Leeds across that first weekend. Against the Bees, I say Hull then started to click, big scoreline. I think, down in Slough on the Saturday night, and another good performance put up by Hull on the Sunday as well. But yeah, just couldn't quite get it over the line. I think Peterborough's huge performance to take points off Leeds is, what paid dividends. Hull couldn't quite get it done on the first weekend, and Peterborough shocked a few by doing it against Leeds on that second weekend. So hats off to them, and you see where it's taken them. Every game counts at that end of the season, doesn't it?
Certainly does, certainly does. Um, and yeah, I mean, I've got to be honest, I was going into the playoffs considering that Peterborough had been, so-so throughout the season. I think
Yeah,
it'd be really safe to say that they seem to have coasted into the playoffs. I for one certainly expect it to be Leeds and Hull to go through from Group A. But just thinking back to that first weekend, so double header against Leeds, obviously very tough in any circumstances. But do you think that with Hull having beaten Leeds in the semi-final of the Cup, perhaps that just acted as a bit of extra motivation for the Leeds team?
possibly motivation. I think these teams have got to know each other so well. They obviously they played each other 6 times in the league, 2 games in friendlies, 2 games in the cup semi-finals, and then 2 games in the playoffs. 11 from 12 games against you. You know some of your opposition more than you know your own teammates at that point. And Ryan Aldridge will have done some great film study with those guys, and they just broke down Hull's game so well. Really made it difficult everywhere. All ends of the ice for Hull. I say I won't take away the effort the whole lads, but things just didn't work on that night. Matty, wasn't too happy with the performance, particularly, out there on the Saturday. In sorry, the Friday, it was the Friday in Leeds, but yeah, you can't take it away from the Knights. They were seriously good that weekend. They made sure that you know, they put a game plan into use to try and counteract Hull's heavy metal hockey. They took the game to Hull because there's been very few sides throughout the season who've tried to get on top and I'd say physically dominate these Seahawks because they're a rough and tumble set of lads. They're quite happy to throw the weight about.
Yes.
But Leeds took it to them, and I don't know if that shocked them as well. But yeah, they were lights out through the first weekend.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So thinking about then the season as a whole, obviously a bit streaky at times throughout the season, as you touched upon. There was the cup final, and then sort of the run in the playoffs, which unfortunately sort of concluded at that group stage. How would you rate the season overall?
I'll be honest, I say a lot of the Hull fans, I just think the cup final was such a gut wrenching. It sort of took a bit of the gloss off what's been a fantastic year. The fourth in the league, cup final, and I say took the playoffs down to the final weekend. Yeah, upsetting not to be there, but compared to the being wooden spooners the year before, it's worlds apart. I'd probably go with looking at probably like 7.5, 8 out of 10, that sort of rating, really, really happy with it. There's only a few things left to tick off for Hull. It's make Coventry, it's win a trophy. That's pretty much what's left now. Matty set some stalls out to try and win some silverware, to get a top four. I think that was his, when we mentioned earlier, playoffs were a minimum. I think top four was really his aim. He wanted to prove that, we were here to be one of the contenders, and they did that, and when that was secured pretty early on, a few weeks out from before the season, the cup semis was secured a few weeks before the end of the cup as well. They sort of were able to start ticking things off earlier than some would expect. So they'll be really happy with that. They've shocked a few, they've surprised a few, they've pleased a lot. And yeah, going ahead, I think they're on a very good footing heading into 24-25.
That leads me nicely on. So, I mean, Hull have been pretty early out the gates, I would say, in terms of signings. There's been a number of re-signings, and Dimitri Zamostra was announced last night as well. Seems fairly settled camp with a number of re-signings as well. Expectations for next year, I'm guessing Coventry and Silverware. Is that sort of what
Yeah,
the expectations are, or
so
would you
it'll be
take
the
one or
it'll
the
be
other?
the yeah, it'll be the aim. So expectations. I always think it sounds like you take things for granted. It'll be the aim. So that'll be the target. Silverware and Coventry. Nothing else will be. Nothing else will suffice in terms of you won't be pleased with anything else now because otherwise it'd just be a case of have we taken that next step forward? Have we sort of plateaued a little bit? And that's not what Maddie wants to do. As we said, we've had successful teams in Hull before. He wants that back again, and you know, there's no reason to see why they can't. I think it's why you've seen sort of so many re-signings, from this core group. A lot of teams are going to retain a good chunk of their players, but for Hull for it to be quite a few of their key important players, including I say two of the imports signed up already in terms of Emil Svek and Owen Sobchak was super early. He might have been one of the first announced players in the whole league, I think. Owen to be returning for next year. So, in terms of the re-signings, there's always the business side of it as well. It's always quite nice to say, get your season tickets in, look who's coming back. So there's that side of it too. But yeah, Hull will be happy with the camp that's coming back already. There's still a lot to be, determined. Matt will be working hard behind the scenes to try and get, quite a few more of those guys back. And to bring people in, as you say, look at Dima last night. It was great to see. I had a good chat with Zamosja on our podcast.
Mhm.
You know, he had a similar sort of opinion to Owen Sobchak, where he said, he's 35 now, Dima. He wants to, in his last couple of years playing, competitive hockey, he wants to be in a team where he can win things. And we talked about the ups and downs of the Steel Dogs at the moment. He described them as a team in transition, and whereas Hull of, they're there and ready and waiting sort of thing. And he thinks he can just add to that. It's great to see that. I say it's not just experience, guys. Look at the youngsters already signed up. Owen Bruton's on the second year of a 2-year deal he signed last year. Declan Jones, who, was Hull's most improved player of the season. He was absolutely brilliant that second half of the season this year. He's re-signed, for next year too. with Deck, he's only sort of, such a young lad. We signed on a two-way, with the whole Jets this season. It took a month or two for him to sort of, re-establish himself on that third line this year. And I think it took him till maybe in the Steel Dogs game in February. I think it's second week of February where he got his first goal for the Seahawks. And then in the next 7 weeks, he scored seven more. All the floodgates opened. And he's been so impressive. He works so hard defensively. He's on sort of their second penalty kill unit as well. Just an absolute grafter. He's the type of players that, particularly with like squad quotas and things like that, Hull need a young, hungry guy who's just happy to work.
Yeah, that's a really important, I think, aspect to be able to get. And I've got to be honest, I do wonder with the signings that Hull have already announced and keeping that core group, whether for some players who perhaps haven't got their futures sorted yet, Hull looks a very tempting place to come because with the likes of Chamberlain and Bonner, Sobchak, Svech, Barmer, got Zamostra and McLaughlin. From an outside perspective, that would seem a fairly attractive proposition of straight away you're going to be going to a team where you can expect to, probably be winning a fair few games and be up there challenging for the silverware. So it'll be interesting to see perhaps who else comes in beyond Zamostra.
I think I say, yeah, 100% agree. In terms of, what Dima and what Sobchak have said, others are going to sort of get that same feel from Hull. And, from Matt, he's the best person at singing Hull's praises, and, giving people the talk, of why they should be the next one to sign up for the Seahawks. And I think with this league this year, we might see a few more players, shifting around, a lot more than we did in last year's off season. I think it's going to be a lot more of a game of chess this year. It's going to be pieces flying all around the place. There's a few teams in very different circumstances to where they have been over the last couple of years. I think it's going to lead to a very interesting next few months. But yeah, Hull are going to be one of those sides where Hull are going to be wanting to pick up a few players. I mentioned that they're wanting to hopefully get a bit more consistency, and with that, you need a few more experienced players. Who've been here and done it in this league, at teams at the very top end of the table. And yeah, Hull are going to be trying to snap up those few who aren't already signed elsewhere.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating sort of off season, I think, and looking forward to seeing how it goes and who ends up where. Moving on, a few quick fire questions. Who was your player of the season?
So I don't actually, I can't believe I've got this far into it without mentioning him. Brock Bartholomew.
Yeah.
He's unreal. He's a lovely guy off the ice, but what he can do on the ice, I think, for this new modern offensive D man that we're seeing, he might be the prototype. He's tall, quick, strong, and he puts up points. 63 points he put up last season. For a D man, top scoring D man in the league. Top, 20 goals for a D man. There's import forwards who got 20 goals.
Yeah.
He's that good. Yeah, he wrapped up at the Hull's awards night as well. I think he took three of the trophies, and I'd have to give him my player of the season.
Sounds a really solid choice there, particularly with those kind of numbers and the impact that he's having. Got this question. This one might be a bit of a trickier one, but if you could re-sign one player from last season who hasn't already signed, who would it be?
I say one of the names I would have loved to have seen back would have been Finley Ulrich, of course, with the news that broke in the last couple of days. He'll be playing his hockey elsewhere next season. Um, I would have to say I'd love to see Brock Bartholomew back. I've not mentioned him for 15 minutes, and I'm going to throw his name twice in there. I'd absolutely love to see him back. He's such a good player, as I say. You see those guys at the top. Hull have got, in terms of point scoring, Brock Bartholomew at number one, and then Deck Barmer at number three. Those two played so well together. They had such good chemistry on and off the ice. Hull have put out so many little clips of, they've got their own little secret handshake, and they just get on, and they play some fantastic hockey together. Shut down guys at the back. At times Hull this year on their top power play ran two D men. How often do you see a side, putting two D men on a top power play unit? But when you've got Brock Bartholomew and Declan Barmer, you can afford to do that. So I'd absolutely love to see him back. I know there's going to be interest elsewhere because of the impact he's putting up. He's a young Canadian D-man. That's always going to be an interesting one for sides at the National League, sides at the Elite Leagues, international sides. You know, he's played in Sweden already. He's played in England. Who knows what he's going to do? Um, I don't know. We'll all find out at some point. I'm sure Matty and Joe Lampley as well. I've got to give him a huge shout out. One of the co-owners of the Seahawks. They'll have been, working Brock, I think, for weeks and weeks, months and months. Similar to how Owen was just straight on the dotted line. I think Brock might be, he might be teasing us a little bit, but hopefully, I really do hope that he'll re-sign. But we'll wait and see.
It sounds like there'd be a sort of a crucial piece of the jigsaw as such if he did.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so now we're going to think about former players. There's a former player that you could re-sign. Who would it be? Now, I appreciate, obviously,
Yeah.
Seahawks only had 2 seasons, so I'm happy for it to be from previous Hull teams as well.
I say that there's a couple. I think if I did have to stick with Seahawks, I'd love to see Liam Danskin back.
Okay.
Of course, he signed for his last season. Came out of well, it was with Solway when they were North One.
Mhm.
Signed for Hull before Solway announced, obviously, they were going national. I think he was not quite, getting the ice time he wanted. Away from home. As a young lad, it's always difficult, and they mutually agreed, during the season. I think it was maybe November, December time that Liam could, head back home to Solway. He's such a good guy, great on the ice. I think he's a really, really good prospect. Young talented D-man. Solway, saw some really, really good solid games out of him last season. I'd love to have him back. If we're still sticking on the D-men side, Hull have had a couple that are, playing around the league at the moment. You've got Jonathan Kirkby one. We know how good he was. And still is. At the Steel Dogs. I'd love to see him. Ice him up in Hull once more. But it's one of those. With the Steel Dogs being in transition, you never know. Whether they're going to be like Dima and maybe want to head off and see what else is out there, or whether you're going to want to stick around to see where the new Sheffield Steel Dogs are going. So it's an interesting one.
Cool. Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah. So you mentioned there Kirk, who's playing at the Steel Dogs, which I guess leads nicely into my next question. So if there was any player that you could sign from a team in the National League, who would it be?
It's a really difficult one. So I don't want to. You don't want to give the obvious answers. You don't want to go and say, the Kieran Browns and the Rory Hermans and those guys who are just pure points. I'd love to see, someone like a Mac Howlett, because I don't think I've ever seen Mac Howlett have a bad game. He really brings it every time he's in Hull or when I've gone to Leeds. He's electric. How quick he can break, and it's from often a standing start. You see him pick it up just outside the defensive blue line, and then he's on your goalie. He's absolutely ridiculous. A couple of us, Thomas Malazinski, because he's got a good relationship with Emil Svek. If Hull did have an import spot free, I'd love to see them two, pair up together once again. I don't know if we'd ever see, Malazinski leave Swindon. I think it'd be a hard one to pull away.
Lined up
Uh,
already. Yep.
and then another one, strange. I'll be honest, I was looking through some stats the other day. I was shocked at, I thought this guy would have got more points. Ivan Bjorky Nordstrom. Every time I see Hull play Peterborough, he seems to. I absolutely love watching him. He's got this. He's so tall. He's got an odd frame. For a very, very good skater. And a very, very talented forward. I think he is the tallest skater in the league, I believe. I think Griffin Priest might be the tallest player. I'm not 100% sure on that, but Bjorky Nordstrom is a tall guy and he's very, very good. I think he only went a point a game last season, which surprised me. But I really like Bjorky Nordstrom too.
Yeah, some good shouts in there, and yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting one because the temptation is always, oh yeah, we'd love to have Kieran Brown and everything like that, but no, some really really good shouts in there, I think. Um, Bring it a little bit closer to home. Obviously, I hope this isn't going to happen, but if Hull could take one player from the Telford Tigers, who would that be?
Finley Howes.
I knew you were going to say that.
I've been a big fan of watching him for a while, but yeah, last season he was lights out. It was 81 points, I think he finished on in the regular season. He's absolutely fantastic. The Brits that are putting up those numbers, those are the difference makers in teams because, the vast majority of clubs in this, league have three very, very talented, non-British trained players. Um, but not all of them have multiple Brits who are putting up those points. It's Finley Howells would be someone I'd love to just go cherry pick away from Telford. Other shouts, I don't think Hull need him now. They've got Dima, but Brad Day, because I just think, yeah, when Brad Day is, on his day, I think he is. He can put up some of the best performances you'll see all season. I think in this National League, he did it against Hull multiple times. Um, Telford were Hull's bogey team this year. They never got past them. Multiple
I wasn't
games.
going to mention that.
Yeah, I've mentioned it a few times on our pod. It's so frustrating, but you put it down to, you know, what a couple of them. Brad Day was an absolute wall. I think 50 something shots. I think in maybe the first or the second game they played this season. A couple where Hull were ahead in the third period and Telford just claw it back. I think that the first game was the shootout win in Hull. I think it was maybe the third weekend of the season, and it was one of those where I think Telford only leveled it with the empty net as well. It was, everything. Fortune favors the brave, and when Tom Watkins, Matty's got what another coach that Matty Davis has such admiration for and a good relationship with Tom Watkins. He drills his side so well. It's why Telford, they might not be the flashiest side in this league, but there's a reason they got where they were in Coventry, and it's because they just play good, solid hockey and they know their role and they do it well.
Yeah,
So I think those two might be my guys. If I had to pick Archie Hazeldine as well, because I'll be honest, I think he's gonna be maybe icing it up more in the Elite League next year. I think was it 23 games for Telford. It was a point a game though. I mentioned three D-men earlier in Brock, Deck, and Olivier Arsenal from Solway. Archie was the only other D-man to hit a point a game in this league last season. So those guys are big.
yeah. I think we're resigned to Hazeldine spending more time in the Elite League. Brad signed last summer, and that was a 2-year deal.
Yeah.
Howells, though, is the big concern because, yeah, okay, he's put the good numbers this season. He also did it last season, so it's no longer just, okay, well, he had like a breakout season or a really good season. It's the fact that he backed it up. I know, saw a couple of online rumors last year, but yeah, this year, I think, yeah, he's the one player that I would really hope that we do keep because British player putting up those numbers, and he's young. It's not as though he's coming towards the end of his career either. He's young, so yeah, I feared that might be the answer. Completely understand why on that one.
I say there's going to be a few teams, isn't there? You're going to have those teams with Telford who are, in that area who want to be, competing for trophies next year, and all of them would take a house if they could. So, wouldn't be surprised if he's got an agent who's been dealing with a lot of phone calls.
Let's hope not. Let's hope not. Flat battery or poor reception, anything like that. Be very happy if that was the case. So, final question then: best team that you saw last season?
It's a difficult one. It might sound like a bit of a cop out answer, but the Leeds Knights for me because Hull took it to them. So many games last season. There were close defeats. There were big victories like that semi-final where Hull blew Leeds out the water. I think it was 9-4 in aggregate across the two games. Hull showed they can rock with Leeds, but then on other nights they turn up and they are another level. There's a couple of times where Hull didn't live up to what they'd have wanted to do against the Knights, and score lines may have been you know non-reflective of some performances, but when the Knights turn up, they are uh, barely playable at this level. They are brilliant, and they're now the bar, they're the metric, and all those 10 teams chasing need to topple them. They've still only got the league this year. That's going to really frustrate them. Going from wanting the treble to just the one, but they're still the bar for me. You don't put up that sort of 50 something game season without playing some very, very high level hockey. So they're the best team I've seen this year.
Not a cop out at all. I think I completely agree with that. I mean, for Telford, we struggled against Swindon, but yeah, I've seen us against Leeds, and kind of felt as though we've almost struggled to land anything meaningful on them. So yeah, by no means a cop out. I would say they're just different level, particularly if they turn up and fancy it. So no, another perhaps not too surprising answer as such there. Well, thanks very much for joining, Connor, and talking us through all things Hull Seahawks past season and sort of what you see for next season, and just a bit around some players from both the Seahawks and the league. So yeah, thanks very much for joining and sharing your thoughts about Hull.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure to join you. Looking forward to see what you've got planned on. The podcast throughout the summer. I and the Tigers. I'll make sure I'm tuning in. I'm looking forward to seeing what other fans have got to say around the league with yourself as well. I think it'll be a fun one. I really like this format. So thanks very much for having me on.
No, absolute pleasure. And yeah, I mean, in terms of the summer, probably lots of like the signing news and stuff like that. And then as we get perhaps into August, September, start to do some season previews. So if you'd be interested in coming back and sort of previewing for the Hull Seahawks, of course, you'd be very, very welcome to do so.
Of course, I'd absolutely love to. Thank you very much.
Sounds great. Thanks everybody for watching. I'll be back soon. Bye for now.